Hello, and welcome to my What I Read When I Traveled the American West Desert video. I posted a Books on Location video, and I shared in that video that I was gathering book ideas for an upcoming trip into the desert. So here I am to share what I read and my thoughts on those book choices. So I started with Race the Sands. This is by Sarah Beth Durst. Sarah Beth Durst has recently received a lot of acclaim for her Spell Shot book series. She has another one coming out in that world called The Enchanted Greenhouse. This is one of her backlist adult standalone fantasies. It seems like a lot of fantasy writers are doing duologies and series, and so to find a standalone is spectacular. So I chose to read Race the Sands in the Great Sand Dunes National Park area. It was a perfect setting to read this book. So in this book we have Tamra. Tamra is a single mother of Shala. Shala is like a preteen. She's been chosen to support the augurs, which are the local religious order, and her inclusion in the temple to train to be an augur is quite costly. And Tamra really needs to be able to secure the funds to be able to pay for her daughter to continue to learn from the augurs. The augurs are part of the magic system. They are a people who can sort of read other people's souls and determine if they're good, if they've committed sins. We also have Quixotes. Quixotes are reincarnated humans that have come back as monsters, basically. Based on their poor actions in their previous life, they come back and they are these large metallic creatures, and they don't have a lot of thought behind their actions. They're just very guttural, visceral reactions to things. They're hungry, they're angry, and they are harnessed as racers. And the way that they're harnessed is through mental strength and power. There's like a telepathic connection that you can develop with your racer. The people who are predominantly developing those telepathic connections are the trainers, which is what Tamra is, and riders. So there are riders of these racers. Kind of can picture like in this like sandy, I picture like Tatooine basically setting. You've got stands and you've got a track, and it's a sandy kind of area. And you have riders who are young adults and even younger children who are riding these racers, and they're trained by people like Tamra. Tamra was once a rider herself, but she continues to make these kind of like impetuous decisions that have injured her. They've injured other people that she's trained. So she's really needing to find someone to train, because all of the people around her have really kind of backed away and said they didn't want to train. Next comes in Raya. Raya is a young lady who's been promised to marriage to a very evil man. Her parents are not listening to her when she says she doesn't want to be married and that he's dangerous and that his former wife has ended up dead. She's very desperate as well. So she connects up with Tamra. Tamra agrees to teach her, and they end up purchasing a Quixote that is this ferocious lion. Through the relationship that Tamra and Raya have, they really get close. Shala loves her. Tamra decides that she wants to adopt her from these parents who are trying to sell Raya off into a marriage. And they really form this very close-knit mother-daughter relationship. We also have Lady Evera. She's sort of holding the purse strings to help kind of Tamra have the money to be able to enter these races with Raya. And so one of my favorite things about this book is the female relationships that develop through this. Not just mother and daughter, but also patroness and having that support relationship and their ability to kind of formulate these friendships. And they don't necessarily, at the beginning they feel a bit tenuous. They really formulate into a very strong foundation of friendships among women. There is political intrigue in this. We have an emperor who has died. We also have his brother, who is now the one who's emperor in waiting, as they kind of find this lost soul of the emperor. So that's kind of what you're doing is, okay, he's been reincarnated. Where is he? I love the complications of the politics in this that sort of undermine everything that Tamra and Raya and the Quixote and Shala are all learning and trying to figure out. There's a little bit of a love line in here, but not much. I mean, it's really your straight fantasy standalone, and it was such a fun read for the Great Sand Dunes area, just really being immersed in that sand environment. She fell like a maple seed, pirouetting on an autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear, or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. I started reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer in Mesa Verde National Park. I have fallen in love with this book. This is a collection of little essays. Wouldn't call them short stories, they're essays. Robin Wall Kimmerer is very highly educated. She is a biology environmentalist professor. She's studied botany, and her whole point in this book is to share indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teaching of plants. So there's this juxtaposition of what science shows us, but what her indigenous background can teach us about the plants. It's a book that I slowly made my way through, where each morning I would read an essay while sitting out, listening to the gurgling of the river, and really watching the plants. I've actually spent time learning what the wildflowers are in the area, what the trees are, learning some of the purposes. It's just really a beautiful book. One of the stories is about asters and goldenrods. So asters are purple and goldenrods are yellow. And so she's talking about how on their own science can study them, but something that they've learned is that asters and goldenrod typically grow together. And because bees see the purple and yellow of the flowers, they're actually more attracted to those areas to pollinate. And so there are more pollinators, more pollination occurring when you've got these plants growing together. Something else is she talks a lot about Three Sisters in here. Three Sisters is a core component of indigenous beliefs, and that is the idea of corn, squash, and beans being the base of your harvests and meals. And it's so intriguing to me. So as somebody who has access to a garden, who does a lot of canning, what she talks about here is that you actually can plant them all together. So the corn is planted, it's growing upright. The beans use the corn stalk to use as a trellis to grow up, and the squash grow out, and the squash prevent weeds. And so European techniques, which I think is what we're using today, where we've got these straight rows, weeding corn is something that I have to do, and it's really a very difficult thing to do. It's so fascinating to learn, and it makes me sad for what we've lost in indigenous knowledge, but I cannot recommend picking up Braiding Sweetgrass enough. Next, while on the Navajo Nation reservation area in Monument Valley, I picked up Laughing Boy by Oliver Lafarge. This is a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about a Navajo young man named Laughing Boy. And one night, Laughing Boy is at one of their dances, and he spies Slim Girl. Slim Girl is a young lady who's been Americanized. She has been the unfortunate recipient of what happened to a lot of Native Americans, which was she was sent to an American school. She was really, there's just a severing of culture where you're not permitted to use your language. You're not supposed to be considering your culture. You were supposed to be learning about how to be American, how to kind of assimilate yourself. Laughing Boy is smitten eventually with Slim Girl. There's a little bit of bumping heads here, but he eventually just falls head over heels for Slim Girl. And Slim Girl's entire modus operandi is to prevent Laughing Boy to know who she is, how she makes her money, and what her background is. And so it's very sad because Laughing Boy comes into this very innocent and accepting. He's got elders and family members who warn him about her and say, I've heard the things that she's done. And he says he doesn't want to hear any more of it. He doesn't necessarily believe it. And Slim Girl, you can see her coming over back to that traditional side from the American side. She still very much has both feet in both worlds, but she is seeing the beauty of the old traditional Navajo ways. This book is full of this push and pull between the appreciation and respect that we should have for the Navajo traditions and the ugliness of when you kind of sever and rip somebody out of that and put them into an American culture and really expect them to just assimilate. This story ends pretty dramatically, tragically. It ends very quickly. The thing that I do appreciate about Oliver Lafarge's work is that it's very well researched. He lived among the Navajo, and so I think his perspective is one that can be trusted. The thing that I'm most grateful for is that Laughing Boy did learn about Slim Girl's true nature. So he was able to kind of see her for who she was. But this does give you a good idea of kind of what Navajo life was like. It's definitely apparent that this was written quite a while ago. It's pretty slim. It's less than 200 pages. Certainly worth the time, though, to read. Tony Hillerman is known as the Native American writer. So I had to pick up a Tony Hillerman. I actually chose Dance Hall of the Dead. With my research, the first book that I think is in this series didn't get the best reviews, but as we move through the series, Dance Hall of the Dead did. And so I went ahead and thought, well, I don't know if I'm going to read the whole series, so I'm just going to go ahead and start here. We follow Joe Leaphorn, who is part of the Navajo tribal police. So this is a murder mystery, and he's got a whole series where we follow Leaphorn through murder cases. So when this first started out, I wasn't sure how I felt about Leaphorn. He seemed kind of like he was put out and he was complaining about having to do his job, and he thought he automatically knew how this was going to turn out. But as we continued, I saw him as developing a little bit more of a methodical viewpoint, and also really loved his relational abilities, how he was able to kind of connect with people to be able to get what he needed. And it didn't feel necessarily transactional. It felt relational, but he was, again, investigating a murder. And so he's trying to find things out. I think one of my favorite parts of this was the description of the land. And so we really, through Tony Hillerman's eyes, can kind of see the descriptions of the plants and how the land lays. And that, I think, was my favorite part. As far as the mystery, I found it enjoyable. I was able to kind of see where this was going. There was a lot of complexity of different things happening, and I think that was that red herring, right, to look over here and not over here. So the murder mystery part and the solution of that was very creative, and I appreciated that in Tony Hillerman's book. Just simply for the fact of Navajo culture, and again, the plants and the land and what things look like, I think Tony Hillerman's murder mystery series is a good choice. The other thing about Dance Hall of the Dead, while we have the Navajo tribal police involved, this actually includes a different tribe as well, which is the Zuni tribe. And there's a lot of religious rites and information that gets shared in this, which is really interesting, something that, I wasn't necessarily familiar with and learned a lot from. While in the Arizona territories, I read These Is My Words by Sarah Agnes Prine, 1881 to 1901. So this is an epistolary style historical fiction written by Nancy Turner. Nancy Turner used the stories that she heard about her ancestor Sarah from her grandmother to create a fictional story. So there is some basis in fact. She also has cross-referenced this with actual historical events, like for instance with Geronimo and some of the weather events that occur. There is some historical basis in that, but the story that she's created for Sarah Pine is not necessarily true to her ancestor. She has embellished and created a different, I believe, love story. So it's intriguing because the first part of this book, you feel like you get a glimpse of who Sarah is, but then I feel like there's a change. There's like a maturing, and she changes a bit into being this more adult grown woman who is a wife and a mother. So much as what I'm discovering in a lot of American Western books, there are cultural stereotypes, there are sort of leaning into those misunderstandings where you have natives who are very violent. And I think authors try to share that other side, but I don't think it's as fleshed out. And so you just kind of feel the violence of Native American actions. There are also just white men who are very rough, violent, evil men who can be found out west and oftentimes get thrown into these stories. So with that said, I would say there are trigger warnings in this. It can be a little jarring. It's very hard to read. There's obviously a lot of death and violence in this because, again, I think that's the core of what the Wild West felt like during this time period. I think the first part of this is interesting, again, as far as a historical fiction. I loved Nancy Turner's viewpoint on what it's like to be a mother and the struggle with kind of losing your identity while still trying to be a mother and a wife. The frustration of, as a woman, she's expected to do certain things, but as a man, she would have more freedom. And so Nancy Turner does include that, and I loved that. There is romance in here, a very sweet, slow developing romance that really comes into becoming one of those once in a lifetime beautiful loves, and I loved that as well. I do think the ending floundered a bit. I think it would have been more satisfying if we would have just not necessarily continued on with maybe the last, 50 pages and just had it end. Just have the journal kind of end, and that was that picture of her life that we got. Also in the Arizona territories, I read Retribution Rails by Erin Bowman. This is actually the second book that I think is in this world. The first book is called Vengeance Road. I found this in a little free library. I thought, especially with the cover, that this would be perfect. And then when you open it up, there's a map of the Arizona territories in here. And the research said that you didn't necessarily need to read the first book to enjoy Retribution Rails. I will say there are spoilers in Retribution Rails, and we do see characters from that first book play very major character roles in Retribution Rails. And we kind of learn about the history. But again, if you're not going to read the whole series, it's fine to read Retribution Rails and get an understanding of what happened in the first book. And you can follow along very easily in this book. So in this, we have Reese Murphy. He is basically been kidnapped and brought into this really terrible Rose gang that does train robberies. They used to do stagecoach robberies. Now they've moved to train robberies. And we get the feeling that Murphy's just he's connected up with these really evil men, but because of misunderstanding, that he's really been kidnapped and brought along and he can't get away. We also have Charlotte Vaughn. Charlotte has lost her father, and her mother is really being pressured by her well-to-do uncle to marry him. And neither her mother nor Charlotte really thinks that's a good idea. Her uncle has questionable motives in all of this. And then we also have two characters that play major roles in the first book who also come back. And these are people who are labeled as gunslingers. They're sort of the people who write the outlaws. So they're not law enforcement, but they're the ones who kind of have kept outlaws in check. And they come back in this book. So Reese and Charlotte meet in a train robbery that does not go well. And Charlotte really shows her mettle. She's got a pistol that she's ready to use, and she meets Murphy. And as she's describing him later on to the law enforcement that comes to kind of talk to people about the train robbery, she discovers that he is the Rose Kid. It's a pretty quick read. You can kind of keep up while moving fast. The only thing I will say is for a YA, pretty sensitive to this, there's a lot of language in there that I found a little bit surprising in a YA novel. Secondly, I do think the author has read Lonesome Dove because some of the language in there about prostitution that happened in the Wild West, apparently, the same words are used in this. And again, for a YA novel, I'm not sure if that was necessary. If you live in the American West Desert or a desert region and have book choices that you have found, or if you know a Native American writer who writes fiction that I can look into, I would love to hear your suggestions. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.